Good afternoon, folks. Let's talk about the first of the 5 easy steps of mathematics, math review. Why math review? Why do we carve out precious math time to engage in the math review process? Well, the first reason is because students need practice. They need repeated reasoning, opportunities to engage in mathematics in order for that learning to be solidified, for the schema to be connected to past learning, and for them to be able to apply key concepts of mathematics to new learning. We call this repeated reasoning, and Robert Marzano taught us that students are going to need dozens of opportunities successfully practicing with new learning in order for that learning to be solidified. So repeated reasoning is a key reason for math review. John Hattie in Visible Learning has also taught us that feedback, providing immediate and specific corrective feedback, is one of the most powerful levers that we have to explode student learning. So through the math review process, we can organize, systematize feedback opportunities to kids. Math is also rich with opportunities for interconnected concepts. And this is not a practice that we've been really engaged with sufficiently in the last decade. We've, unfortunately, I'm afraid, disconnected math, and we and students see math as discrete elements instead of as a rich whole. So through math review, we have the opportunity to connect different domains of mathematics, which is what we ought to be doing more of. You know, the last why behind math review kind of addresses the cliche, if it's predictable, it's preventable. And we can predict that there are going to be students who need more support with some concepts. So instead of always feeling like we're playing catch up or feeling panic that we don't have the time within our day, within our units, to support students with concepts with which they need more support, let's build that in, let's prepare for that. So math review is, in that way, a critical piece of RTI. So let's talk about some of the key components of math review, or some of the key ways of determining what content we're going to be selecting to review in a math review process. One way of organizing this is just around concepts, key concepts of mathematics. Those concepts in early grades might be number bonds and decomposition of numbers. In the upper elementary grades, it might be single-digit computation or multi-digit computation, both the concepts and the algorithms associated with that. Going up into middle school, it might be fractional awareness and proportional reasonings. It might be practice with integers, because we know that students need a primer on integers prior to moving into, let's say, order of operations, evaluating expressions, or even solving 1 and 2 steps equations. So we might organize our math review around conceptual concepts, categories of concepts. Another way we might organize our math review is around pre-assessment information. In other words, we have an upcoming unit of instruction, and either we give informal or formal pre-assessments that reveal to us that students have some deficits in some important foundational prerequisites that are in an upcoming unit. Well, it's going to be wise for us to start to use math review as kind of a pre-teaching opportunity. So through a pre-assessment, formal or informal, we can determine some of the topics that we might want to engage in within math review. A last area also related to RTI that we might want to use math review for is as a form of interventions. So in intervention, we might have common assessment evidence through formal or informal common assessment practices that lead us to draw the conclusion that, hey, we got some students who need more support in some areas. Our common assessments, our data teams reveal, hey, we have some key concepts with which students need more support, and so we will build in targeted systematic time for intervention, tier 1 and tier 2 types of interventions, throughout the math review process. All right, so we've talked about why math review and how we can sort of determine the topics for math review. Now let's talk about some things we kind of need to probably prepare ourselves as teachers and our students for to do math review successfully. One of the first things we need to prepare them for is to talk about math. We maybe have classrooms in which we talk at students about math, but we need to increasingly have environments in which students are talking to us about math, to each other about math, even talking to themselves about math. So modeling for them and providing scaffolds and stems and frames for students to have math discourse, critically important. We also want to make sure we talk about collaboration, that we teach kids how to talk to their partners about math in an efficient, effective way. We can't just put two kids together and expect them to know what to do. So how do we prepare them and practice for them and maybe provide fishbowl opportunities when we model for them what it looks like to practice within mathematics? You know, we have two primary ways that we're going to engage in math review. One is through a teacher-directed process with a lot of organizational features, a lot of predictable procedures, and when students become real proficient, and we as a class become real proficient with a teacher-directed format, we're going to move into a really rich student-directed process. We want students to be as involved in their learning as possible. You know, there's that old cliche, the one who's doing the talking is doing the learning. So the more we can have our students doing the talking, including from the front of the room, kind of guiding the rest of the class through the conversation, the better. So let's start with a teacher-directed process. And here's some things, again, that you just want to make sure you're preparing the class for. One of them is collaboration again. You are going to, through the math review process, you're going to be having students talk to students. So invest time early in preparing for math review to have students talking to students. The next thing you want to do is start to have conversations about big ideas or key ideas in mathematics. You want ultimately for students to be coming up with their own ideas about what are key concepts in mathematics. But to begin with, you might need to front load them and to model for them what is a key idea. Here's another key piece, y'all. We need to have students showing their work in mathematics more than they ever have, preferably in an organized way. So it might be preferable, desirable, to have students numbering each of their steps. Step one, I drew number one with a circle, and then I have the students writing down what they did in step one, step two, step three, helping them, guiding them in the importance of showing their work. We can predict also that students are going to make errors. In fact, we might even anticipate some of the errors that they make. That would be very wise. So we need to get comfortable with ourselves and have students be comfortable with an error analysis process. So those are some key pieces that aren't just important in math review, but are important throughout our work with students in mathematics. But it's also work we want to probably front load them with. The other thing we need students to be able to do is to reflect on their own practice. And again, to expect them to do this overnight is probably not going to occur. So how do we model that for them? How do we scaffold that for them? But we have to have them reflect on their mathematics. It's going to be a key part of math review. It's going to be something we need to prepare them for. So again, a couple of different ways we can engage in the math review process, teacher-directed and student-directed. Let's talk about some of the key elements of the teacher-directed process and the student-directed process, kind of to close up this part before we have some discussion time, some reflection for you as participants on math review. And then we're actually going to practice it. But first, teacher-directed. You know, you want to have the students be prepared for this process. So what are your procedures, your routines for them organizing their paper? Where are they going to put the date and the time? Of course, what are the problems that you want to select? And you're probably going to be selecting about 2 to 3 problems, and you are going to give them only about 2 minutes for them to independently work on these problems. It's not a race. It's not a did I get done or did I not get done? But it's 2 minutes of dedicated individual work time. And then you're gonna set a timer that talks about those 2 minutes being expired, and then you're going to move into the next phase of math review, about 6 minutes of collaborative problem solving. So the way that's going to look is you have your A partner and B partner, probably starting with pairs as the most manageable way of organizing your students, and they are going to work together on solving these math problems. How are you going to organize that? Are you going to have procedures for them taking turns in talking? Is one student going to take the lead on one problem and the next student going to take the lead on another problem? How are you going to organize that work? you guys, after those 6 minutes comes the rest of math review. Now, I failed to mention that math review, to be efficient and effective, is going to be brief. That sounds probably a little odd, but to be effective and efficient, it needs to be brief. We're talking about 15 minutes. You probably can't afford more than 15 minutes in your math block. But boy, those 15 minutes of math review used wisely are going to have a huge payoff. Well, we're about 8 minutes in now to math review. We've had 2 minutes of individual work time and 6 minutes of collaborative work time. Now it's time to process the work. So now the class is coming back together, and we're getting ready to process how we've done. We're going to start the processing phase of math review by just ensuring the students have followed basic directions. So you're going to make statements like, give yourself a star if you've written your name and the date and the title, the heading of this paper in the way in which we've always talked about it. And of course, you would be showing this either on an overhead, under a document camera, or on an interactive whiteboard. You would be modeling for them where the date and the name and the title should appear, and you'll be modeling the starring of this. And students will be following along with you. They're active participants in the processing piece. Next, you are going through the problems themselves. You're solving the problems for and with the students, and they, as active participants, are starring as they identify where they have done this work. When they haven't completed the tasks, whether it be the mundane tasks of name, date, and heading, or whether it be specific steps or specific routines within the problem-solving process that you have identified as important. I'll give you an example. Maybe part of your routines are to identify key mathematical vocabulary. And if that's the case, then you'll probably model. Give yourself a star if you've identified the key operations that are in play in this problem. And if you want them to do that, then that's obviously something you'll call out in the processing phase. Think of this processing as an opportunity for you to be a metacognitive modeler, for the teacher to be metacognitive about how to work with mathematics. Think of yourself as the model learner. So there's going to be a lot of animated talk, a lot of thinking aloud, and you're requiring students to follow you while you're thinking aloud by starring the various phases of the problem-solving process that they've engaged in with whatever problems you've assigned to them. Just a parenthetical comment about this process. You might think, how would I do this with young students? How would I do this with older students? Well, there are going to be differentiated, sort of age-appropriate ways of doing it, but let's not make mistakes about our expectations for students. For young students, they can do this. They might do it verbally. They might do it orally, but they can still do it. What about older students? Will this appear too babyish for them or too elementary for them? No, it won't. We've done this with students of all ages. You might not use the same type of language with different ages of students, but asking students to process through their work and asking them to give a star where the work has occurred successfully, that's entirely appropriate, and all students will participate in that. All right, continuing with teacher-directed math review in the processing phase. There are going to be opportunities, maybe opportunities that we as teachers manufacture to conduct an error analysis. So we can predict ways in which students make mistakes. Maybe we incorporate those into the math review processing part so that we anticipate and even model, I wonder if any of us made an error like this, or sometimes I make an error like this, and I know that's not correct, and here's why. But model that error analysis phase. And then as we're completing this processing piece, let's move into the next important phase, the end of math review, which starts with reflection. Have the students be involved in reflecting. Give them a frame, a sentence frame, at least initially, right, to help them reflect. I solved these problems correctly because, or I made some mistakes in solving this problem because. Give them some guidance in how they're going to reflect on their process. This is so important, and not just for the future. In other words, next time I want to remember, but it's going to be part of the learning process in the present. So the reflection portion is very, very important. As we continue to conclude math review, We want to model for students and have students